Everyone who's called for the altcoin season over the last few years has been wrong, myself included. What we have seen are glimpses of hopes of an altcoin season when a narrative does very well. Yes, there is tons of money to be made, but the 2017 and 2021 altcoin season has not yet happened in this cycle. So today we're going to be taking a look at some past data and try to make sense as to what has happened over the last 48 hours and answer that question. Are we ever going to see a very similar altcoin season to the 2017 and 2021 cycles? So if you are new here, make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, and let's talk about altcoin. So first things first, we are still on weekend volume, so we're not necessarily out of the gutter just yet, but we've definitely seen all altcoins bounce from these crazy wick lows they just had 48 hours ago, and we are still seeing some coins do better than others. Some narratives do hold up a little bit better. If we take a look at what's trending over the last 24 hours, we have privacy coins still doing quite well. We have Zcash here up 60% over the last week. Yes, it did dip, but it's been bought up quite nicely. And we do have some coins rallying a little bit better than others. But of course, like we are currently seeing, Bitcoin is still around $110,000 to $111,000. And as I mentioned in yesterday's video, I do think we are still in this bull market. Reason being, if you pull up your Bitcoin chart, look at the 50-week moving average. This is going to tell you what is happening with Bitcoin's bull market. We're not talking about altcoin just yet. We're going to get there. But as you all know, Bitcoin is king. And if Bitcoin falls, well, altcoins are going to get wrecked. We saw a glimpse of that over the last few days. But right now, Bitcoin is still above this blue line, which is the 50-week moving average. And every time it comes to that line over the last few years, it has held as support and continue onwards for this bull market. If I bring you back to the last cycle, which is 2021, what we have here is, again, that 50-week moving average acting as support during, a pullback of the bull market. And we had a few weeks of, consolidation towards the end of the bull market. And after that, we had a couple week closes below this 50-week moving average, turning all of it into resistance right over here in February of 2022. And that was literally the, end of the bull market and into the bear market. So that 50-week moving average, in my opinion, is very key to the success of this bull market. Watch it for Bitcoin because, as I said, altcoins are extremely related to Bitcoin. Now, if you take a look at the fear and greed index, this is also what's, taken us aback right now in the markets. We're seeing a lot of panic, a lot of fear, and we have right now the fear being at 31, which obviously means that everybody's freaking out. And if you look at, the last year or so, we've had instances where we've been even lower, one in March, one in April with the tariff news, with more liquidations back then. But what happened just a few days ago was absolutely crazy. We're talking about $20 billion worth of liquidations cascading and crushing altcoins anywhere from 50 to 70 to 80% in some cases. And it leaves us with what happens next. Now, if you look at the current liquidation levels for Bitcoin, it is very interesting because there are people betting long and there are, of course, people betting short. Now, what is going to happen is, anybody's guess here. But if we take a look at these metrics on the long side, all the way up to roughly $107,000, there's about $1.12 billion of long leverage. And if you take a look at the short side, you have roughly, $2 billion all the way up to $114,000. So obviously it makes sense. We just had a crazy liquidation event on everybody that was long in the market. So right now, people are still trying to short leverage the market, which is why there's more volume on the short side. And everybody who is longing the market is now saying, well, we just had 20 billions of liquidations. There's no way that's going to continue. So the whole question here for Bitcoin and the liquidity is whether or not market makers are going to push it to the downside first, grab that long liquidation here before pushing it back up to the short side and grabbing this liquidity here. So if we take a look at the liquidation heat map, well, as we can see, we do have some liquidations around 109,000, which, it has wicked down to, but we definitely do have a lot more liquidations around 113,000 all the way up to 114,000. So of course, people are thinking that, the market's going to continue going down because of what we've just seen. But at the end of the day, nobody really knows what's going to happen, but you have to have the idea of, Bitcoin's invalidation target, whether or not we go below this 50-week moving average, which we are very far from right now. That is around $101,000. We would have to have weekly closes below this. And again, the week candle that we're currently in closes today as you're watching this video. So I'm not very worried about Bitcoin and, the bull market status right now, but if you take a look at altcoins, it's kind of a completely different story. If we start by looking at social metrics, because people are obviously hearing about, crypto crashing on a Friday into Saturday, people panicking. But if you look at what's happening on, crypto's interest, well, we have Bitcoin here definitely going up in terms of interest over the last, day, as people are likely Googling what's happening with Bitcoin as it lost 10% in a matter of 30 minutes. But if you take a look at Ethereum, you have pretty much no, real new interest, even though Ethereum is back to some of the prices it was, a few months ago. And if you take a look at altcoins, again, there isn't a whole lot of interest. And if you look at crypto as a whole, well, you're also going to see that it is coming back up because of that liquidation event. But before that, there was absolutely no interest, even though Bitcoin was pretty much at all-time highs. So that is a very interesting, statistic to look at, because socially speaking, there's not a whole lot of interest in crypto. And that is very different from all the other cycles that we've seen. So the question remains, is that social interest going to come back later into Q4 when we make new highs, or is it simply not going to be there this cycle? I would have to, lean towards the first argument, whereas Bitcoin making new highs, altcoins bringing the markets back up would likely push social interest back up, similar to what we saw in 2017 as well as 2021. So with that being said, if we go ahead and talk more specifically about altcoins, right now we are in the middle parts of November. And if we take a look at the total 3 chart minus USDT, so we're looking at altcoins here divided by Bitcoin, we actually made a new cycle low as the liquidations were happening. Now, if we take a look at just what this means, what this chart really represents is that back in 2022, we made, new highs on altcoins. Everything was good. That was basically during, the 2021 bull market. And then ever since that point on, we have seen altcoins bleed against Bitcoin. And that means that altcoin prices have been reduced compared to Bitcoin's price. And what we can see from this chart is that at some specific point in time, we do get these mini rallies in altcoins. And what we do see is that sometimes we get these mini alt rallies depending on what's happening in the space. And that pushes, the altcoin versus Bitcoin relationship back up for a short instance. But as you can all agree, from, the end of 2022 or from the beginning of 2022, we've been in a downtrend for altcoin. It's undeniable to say anything else. But of course, this is looking at macro altcoins, so essentially all of the altcoins except for Ethereum here. But individually speaking, there has been opportunities through the roof over the last few years. Now, I want to point out a few examples here. So back in June of 2022, we actually had, a mini altcoin season here where altcoins did very well. They went, from 59 all the way to 86. And that was a move where altcoins were showing strength. Then there was an absolute bloodbath. And then as you can see from time to time, we had in November of 2023, a nice little pump on altcoins. altcoins here. But soon after, there was another long, brutal dip for altcoins. Then, as you guys probably all remember, we had November, December hype in 2024. That was the mini altcoin season with artificial intelligence. We saw, AI agents go crazy. And again, there was a whole lot of money to be made. But unfortunately, again, that was another time where after that, we saw altcoins bleed again and put even a new low for that cycle that we're currently in. And then just recently in June, all the way to, September, we've had momentum on altcoins. We're seeing things, come back from these lows back in the early parts of June. And unfortunately, we get a massive liquidation event that literally makes another cycle low for our altcoins against Bitcoin. So that is essentially what has been happening over the last few years. We've had many altcoin seasons, but in general, altcoins are still down and continue to make new lows against Bitcoin. Now, if we go a step back and you just look at altcoin season for 2017 and 2021, it's very evident in this chart that this is your 2017 bull market and this is your 2021 bull market for altcoins. And what you can see is that we don't have that for 2025 just yet. And now the question is it going to happen or is it not going to happen? Well, let's take a look at a few things because right now we are mid-October, as we said, and let's take a look at what happened to, October back in these cycles. So 2016 was when Bitcoin halved. So if we go to 2017, which is the post-halving year, which is where we are in currently because Bitcoin halved in 2024, we're in 2025, so post-halving year. If you take a look at what happened in 2017, so we had this chart, Total 3 minus USDT versus Bitcoin continue to go down from September all the way to that, last week of October. This is September and October, and it shows the relationship of altcoins versus Bitcoin continuing to go down, essentially making a new low in October before going absolutely crazy in November. But after November, it's funny because it comes all the way back to some of the lows that it hit in that October month. Now, it's not exactly the same low, but relatively close to it. As we can see, this candle wicks at about 0.25 and this one wicks at about 0.27. So we had September, October, being bad for altcoins in this relationship, meaning that Bitcoin's gaining dominance. And November, the first week of November, very good for altcoins, but throughout the last, weeks of November, more pain for altcoins until December, where we had, an absolute craziness for altcoin, and that was your altcoin season in 2017. Now, if we fast forward to 2021, again, we had 2021, which was, the post-halving year of 2020. Bitcoin did have in 2020. So if we go to October of 2021, it is right over here. As you can see, we have September, reaching a new high for this chart, meaning altcoins were doing relatively well. But after that, we have, a few consolidation weeks in September, more downside pressure in October. So we have essentially altcoins falling to Bitcoin throughout this time, which is what we're currently seeing, a low of that, chart in the middle parts of October, and then more rally for altcoins later into January of 2022. So this is, again, something that I'm looking at because right now we've continued to see downside pressure to alts versus Bitcoin. And if you even take a look at 2020, you can see that back here, we were again in September, October, and altcoins were continuing to bleed against Bitcoin in 2020 before, of course, the COVID crash that we had here. So right now, it really begs the question, does the market just continue to do what it's been doing over the last few cycles? If we look at this, well, what do we have here? We have, a very local top in the mid-September, and ever ever since then, altcoins have been bleeding against Bitcoin with that, crazy black swan event that we just had with liquidations going through the roof and putting in a new cycle low for altcoins versus Bitcoin. Maybe for the rest of October, altcoins continue to bleed against Bitcoin. Not sure if it makes a new low to this. Not sure if it goes all the way back to where it was, in 2020 before the massive, run up on altcoins. But I do think that if history repeats itself and we have October continuing to go down, November a little bit of a rally, and then potentially even, another downtrend to alt in November before December comes around, that could be a possibility for altcoins. But I do think that, we are likely than not going to have something similar to this, where we are going to have a parabolic move for altcoins right when no one expects it. And that is why I'm keeping a close eye on this chart here, because I do expect a similar move than these previous cycles, because that is what the data shows. So that chart is definitely something to continue monitoring in Q4 for the next few weeks, because typically speaking, Bitcoin does make its market cycle top in Q4. If we take a look at another piece of data, if we look at Bitcoin dominance plus Ethereum dominance and USDC and USDT dominance, we can see that this 82% or so, we have, time and time again, some resistance on this, level around 82%. When it reaches that, there is typically a big move that happens after, where we do see that dominance of those four assets go down, which essentially means that altcoin dominance goes up, or altcoins do well. If we go back to 2021, we can see that this actually peaked at 89%, of course, massive wick up, and then that started the crazy altcoin season that we had in 2021. This is, ETH, Bitcoin, USDC, USDT, stable coins losing dominance in the market, meaning that altcoins are going up. And if we take a look at, time and time again, throughout the last few years, every time we've reached that 82%, it's been rejected down, and we've had, positivity for altcoins here, positivity for altcoins here. This is your November to December, mini altcoin season. Just recently, we've topped out again, and we had positivity for altcoins over the last few weeks. And now we see a wick all the way up to 84%. And 84%, puts us at this range here back in 2021 before everything went back down. Now, of course, it's just a wick. So right now we're at 80%, but that is definitely another chart that I'm looking at, monitoring Bitcoin dominance, ETH dominance, and stable coin dominance. Now, if you look at just ETH dominance itself, well, it had been going up ever since April, and just now it is at 12.5%, and just a few weeks ago it was around 15%. Now, where it's consolidating is very interesting, because if we zoom in on this part here, well, this brings us back to October of 2020, and as you can see, we had a very nice run up for ETH dominance all the way into August, and from September all the way to October, we had negative downside to Ethereum dominance before another run up in late parts of December. So this is, all things to continue looking at as we are continuing to monitor what's happening in the space. I don't think ETH dominance is going back and making a new low. I do think it's going to be some sort of a lower high and then onwards and upwards for ETH dominance. And then we're likely going to see, things trickle down into altcoins, which is why I still believe there's going to be an altcoin season. But right now, everybody is expecting altcoins to do well. And as I said, there are specific instances where altcoins can do very well. Different narratives are doing well at different times. But right now, Bitcoin is still king, and then it's going to go to Ethereum, and then it's going to trickle down into altcoins. But like I said, I do think that's a matter of time. In Q4 sometime, we are going to have that reversal for altcoins. Let me know what you guys think down below. And to top it all off, if we look at what Ben Cohen posted on Twitter here in terms of crypto market cap trend line, if you look at the 2013 bull market, you look at the 2017 bull market and the 2021 bull market, and that red line is the fair value of the crypto markets. we have not seen an extension of that like we saw in these previous cycles. We're basically right at that fair value. And as we all know, during, that euphoria stage, the last stage of the bull market, things go crazy. And this chart kind of proves that we're not there just yet. So again, my thoughts only, not financial advice whatsoever. If you want to stay up to date with crypto, check out the link in the description below. That's our premium Discord. But with that being said, if you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe, hit the like button. Let me know your thoughts about altcoin season down below, and I'll catch you guys in my next video. Peace.